Merry Christmas and welcome to another episode of Travelogue here on Sparks 1524. I'm Nathaniel Miller. Gettysburg has been etched into American history as the site of the biggest and bloodiest battle of the entire Civil War. Because Gettysburg has chosen to be a effectively living time capsule, a visit to the Shriver House Museum during the holidays can give you a unique look at an early Victorian Christmas in the United States. George Washington Shriver and Henrietta Weichert both grew up on farms outside of Gettysburg. They got married in 1855. They moved to Gettysburg from the farms in 1859, and Hetty was overjoyed because they have two children, Sadie and Molly. Well, now she could just go down the street to the market or to the bank. The children had educational opportunities and playmates. She had neighbors to talk to, whereas out on the farm, you have to walk miles to get to town. So for Hetty, this was incredible to move into town. For George, it was a great opportunity. The Shriver family is an incredibly wealthy family, so much so that George could buy and build the Shriver House for his family with a saloon in the basement that he was going to open and run as a business. He finished the basement out properly. The floor was bricked. In fact, there's one section where the Shriver House Museum has preserved a little wood frame around some of the actual original bricks laid by George and his laborers. George bought wallpaper for the house and the saloon. Wallpaper was pretty damn expensive. To top it all off, some of the wallpaper he bought had blue ink in the pattern. It was blue. Blue, like what's behind me, was a very expensive color. This studio wall behind me that I painted, when I painted it cost me maybe $200 for the paint. So I also had not just paint here, but I used the same paint for a couple accent walls in the house. $300, that was it. In the 19th century, especially around 1860, that much blue paint would have been thousands and thousands of dollars. So if you had the money to afford wallpaper that had blue just in the pattern, you had money. But everybody knew a conflict was coming. Everybody thought it'd be about a 90-day affair, but it was still going to be pretty nasty. But hey, at least it's only 90 days. Everybody will be back for Christmas at the end of 1861, right? In 1861, George enlists with Hetty's regretful but enthusiastic blessing because they're fighting for their country. He goes off to war. He does get home again for Christmas in 1863, but is captured by Confederate forces and dies in a prisoner of war camp in 1864. Hetty is forced to sell the house and the saloon to cover their debts, and she does remarry. She and Sadie and Molly move on. So it's a tragic story. It's one of the great tragic romances in our history. That's all in the future, however. The year that the Shriver House Museum has recreated for their Christmas program is 1860. The country's holding its breath. We know something's coming, but at this moment, we still have Christmas. So we get to see an early Victorian Christmas in America. Mistletoe is a fun tradition. You walk into the mistletoe and you get to give or get a kiss. It's kind of a free-for-all today in that sense. It was a custom all the way back in the early Victorian era, but there were rules. You invited people to your house for a house party. As the guests would come, the young single men would gather in the entry hall under a bough of mistletoe hung from the central lamp or the central part of the ceiling. Now, mistletoe has little white berries on it. That's going to be very important here in just a moment. As the young single ladies were escorted in by their father, their brothers, their mothers, if the lady was open to having a kiss, she would walk under and stand under the mistletoe. And it was up to the young gentleman for one of them to get to her first. And it wasn't a grab and lay the smack on her. He would get to her first, and she would turn her head, and he would give her a very delicate kiss on the cheek. And then she would head on into the party, and then that young man would reach up to the sprig of mistletoe and pull off one of those little white berries. Once all the berries were gone, kissing was over. It stopped. The Christmas tree is one of the most ubiquitous parts of our celebration today. It originated in Germany. The Shriver children, Sadie and Molly, already had Christmas trees. Their ancestors were those Germanic immigrants who brought the Christmas trees to America. But it's not the Christmas tree we think of. Trees were usually much shorter, and you would set them up on a table, maybe 3 or 4 feet. You set up on a table, so now it's head height. Table has is festooned with a beautiful tablecloth. You've got decorations on the tree, the children's Noah's Ark toy. Did you notice the Noah's Ark toy? In the Victorian era, proper Christian children in many households were allowed one toy to play with on Sundays and holidays, and religious holidays, the Noah's Ark toy. Therefore, that toy would come down from their room and would be part of the Christmas decorations, because on Christmas Day, they could open that present. They could play with that toy, excuse me. George brought the tree in, and then he would cut the branches off so it creates a tiered effect, like a wedding cake, and set it up. Now the tree would be lit with candles. This was the 19th century now. In the 21st century here, the Shriver House, their candlelit Christmas tour is of course done with LED candles because it's a safety issue. But in the 19th century, the tree was lit with candles. That's one reason why you'd thin out the branches, so you could put the candles up and minimize the fire risk. There was also a bucket of water right next to the tree that even the children had been trained that if that tree caught fire, that bucket of water was dumped on it without a thought. Wreaths are another ubiquitous part of our holiday tradition, and they come from the trimming of that Christmas tree. By the way, the term trimming the tree, it comes from when you would trim out those excess branches to create that tiered look. You had to trim branches, you trimmed the tree. Well, now you have all these pine balls hanging around. What do you do with them? Well, take all those pine balls, start tying them and knotting them together, and you can make a garland. Tie them together a different way, you have a wreath. Very easy to make, it's very festive, your house is decorated. One of our favorite Christmas carols in our country is I'll Be Home for Christmas. It's a lovely song. One of the lines that has confused many people for many years is, please have snow and mistletoe and presents on the tree. A lot of people I know think that I chose the word on. The author of the song chose the word on because presents under the tree just kind of has a clunky, it messes up the rhythm. George trimmed this tree into a tiered look, right? Presents back in those days were very small. Little gifts of food, small toys for the children. They would be wrapped in pretty paper, and those little gifts would be set on the tree branches. The presents on the tree. Dinner looks kind of modern. A feast is a feast. Potatoes, roast turkey, or chicken or ham, whatever you like. But there's something on this two things on this table that tell you a lot about the culture these people had and where they came from. The first are the Christmas crackers. Those are those cylindrical things wrapped in paper. When you pull them apart, they make up a crack. They're crackers. Inside would be a real flimsy, thin paper crown that everybody who got one would wear during the meal. And it wasn't a cheap little thing. Again, things are expensive. They're made by hand. Even a paper item was highly valued as a gift because somebody physically took the time to make it. So those little paper hats, paper crowns were worn with a sense of joy because they symbolize the crown of Jesus Christ. There'd also be little presents in there, fruits, small toys. So for children especially, but even adults, Christmas crackers were a fun little tradition to share before the meal. And at Sadie and Molly's place at the table, you'll notice little cards of Santa Claus. Santa Claus also came into our country from these Germanic peoples. Of course, back then he was St. Nicholas, who was a real historical figure that would go through the towns in his area giving food to the poor. The tradition, of course, grew that he would give presents to good children, and bad children actually did get coal back in those days. There were consequences kids were given for misbehavior. Prior to Christmas, Sadie and Molly would raid Hetty's stocking drawer to find Hetty's longest and most pretty pair of stockings so they could hang those up in the hopes that St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, would come and give them little toys and fruits. Especially if they were really good, they might get an orange. An orange or other citrus like that were true treasures because they were so rare. If a child got an orange, that child was over the moon because that was like a bar of gold. It was pure treasure to them. Now, an American tradition that developed from the Northeast is our popcorn and cranberry garland. I personally think this actually started as a way for kids to do something because it's very easy. Even toddlers, 3, 4, 5-year-olds back in that day were already handling needle and thread. Little girls were following with mom when she's working. They'd already be sewing. A lot of them would be sewing clothes for their dolls as play, but they were learning how to sew. Sadie and Molly would be sitting there, since they were the children, stringing popcorn, cranberry, popcorn, cranberry, popcorn, cranberry, making that garland. And of course, being kids, they probably were eating more popcorn and cranberries than they were stringing, but I think that was a tradition that got going because it gave the kids an easy thing that they could handle, but that was also festive and beautified the house. A wealthy family like the Shrivers would have had a guest room. and their guest bed would probably have a trundle bed under it so you could house more guests. Bed space is at a premium, and during the winter, you wanted people in the bed with you because it helped you stay warm. Christmas time, you're probably going to have a lot more guests. Where do you go with those guests' kids? The attic. The kids were stuck in the attic. Now, before you say that, oh my God, that's horrible, they were freezing. Your fires went out at night, so your house got cold no matter what. Those kids in the attic, they weren't going to be any colder than anybody else. They'd be in these nice little box beds, all huddled up together. Mom and Dad would come upstairs, read them a story, say their prayers, say goodnight, head downstairs, shut the lights off by going, these were candles and lamps. And those little kids upstairs would, of course, be little angels. They'd lay down and they'd sleep and have visions of sugar plums dancing in their head. And if you believe anything I'm saying right now, you were never a kid yourself on a sleepover. What do we do today when we're kids and we have a sleepover? As soon as Mom and Dad or Mr. and Mrs. whoever leave and the lights are out and the doors are shut, we are up. We are talking and twittering and jibber-jabbing and trying to keep it down so we don't wake the grown-ups. They did the exact same thing. Those kids were up like a shot, talking to each other quietly, looking out the window, waiting for Santa Claus and his reindeer. By the way, Rudolph wasn't part of this. Rudolph, as the ladies at the Shriver House Museum pointed out to us during this Christmas tour, Rudolph wasn't born until the 1930s. The Victorians of 1860 in our country or in Europe, they're no different from us. They loved a good party, they wanted to celebrate religious holidays with friends and loved ones, and they wanted to do it in style. But the kids were still kids. They played, they wrote letters to Santa Claus. During the sleepover in the attic, they'd get up and they'd play, and they might even get in trouble. You know, how many of us were on a sleepover and one of the adults woke up and told us to be quiet and go back to bed? It would happen to them too. In the end, we're still people. We love a good party. We celebrate with music and food and bright decorations. If you visit Gettysburg, make sure you go to the Shriver House Museum. It is one of the most phenomenal house museums I have ever seen. It's an entirely private entity that is dedicated to truly preserving and telling these stories. Well, that was my Christmas experience there. If you like this video, please hit that little like button. Feel free to share this if you want. If you like my ongoing programming, I do ask you to hit that subscribe button. I'm not the most prolific programmer, but I do try and get something out once or twice a month at least. Until we meet here again on Sparks 1524, I hope you have a Merry Christmas and a happy holiday season as appropriate to your traditions. Be safe, and I will see you next year. Until then, go do some great things.